Şimdi arkadaşlar öncelikle kanalıma hoş geldiniz. Sizinle bugün bir Star Tracker hakkında araştırma yapacağız. Tabi zamanla videolarımız gelecek. Bir dönem boyunca Star Tracker tasarlayıp yapmaya çalışacağız sizinle birlikte. Videolarımı her hafta düzenli bir şekilde atmaya çalışacağım. Şu anda kanalımda 4 abone var. Daha önce hiç video atmadım. Düzenli her hafta videoları atmaya çalışacağım. Şimdi öncelikle Star Tracker Türkçe karşılığı yıldız izleyici diye geçiyor. Şimdi bugünlük biraz araştırma yapacağız sizinle birlikte. Videomuz bu şekilde olacak. Şimdiden teşekkürler. Tabii videoyu izledikten sonra kanala abone olup beğenmeyi de unutmayalım arkadaşlar. Artık YouTube işine de girmiş olduk. Şimdi arkadaşlar yıldız izleyici Star Tracker. Bir yıldız izleyici fotoseller veya bir kamera kullanılarak yıldızların konumlarını ölçen optik bir cihazdır. Arkadaşlar fotoseller ise fotosel üzerine düşen ışığın şiddetiyle orantılı olarak voltaj üreten ışık algılayıcısıdır. Şimdi devam edelim. Pek çok yıldızın konumunu gökbilimciler tarafından yüksek derecede doğrulukla ölçüldüğünden bir uydu veya uzay aracı üzerindeki bir yıldız izleyici yönünü veya tutumunu belirlemek için kullanılabilir. Yani hani uzay araçlarının yönünü gideceği yolu belirlemek için kullanılan bir cihazmış. Yıldızlara göre uzay aracının bunu yapmak için yıldız izleyicinin yıldızların bir görüntüsünü elde etmesi, uzay aracının referans çerçevesinde görünen konumlarını ölçmesi ve yıldızların konumlarının bir yıldız kataloğundaki bilinen mutlak konumlarıyla karşılaştırabilmesi için yıldızları tanımlaması gerekir. Bir yıldız izleyici, gözlemlenen yıldızların desenini gökyüzündeki bilinen yıldız desenleriyle karşılaştırarak yıldızları tanımlamak için bir işlemci içerebilir. Şimdi bir de tarihçesine bakalım tabi. Ne zaman ya? Şimdi ilk 1900'lerde ve 1960'ların başında atalet navigasyon sistemlerinin INS yani kısaltması kıtalar arası menziller için yeterince hassas olmadığı dönemde yıldız izleyiciler erken uzun menzilli balistik füzelerin ve seyir füzelerinin önemli bir parçasıydı. Bir kılavuz yıldızın seçilmesi dünyanın dönüşü nedeniyle zamana ve hedefin konumuna bağlıdır. Genellikle birkaç parlak yıldızdan oluşan bir seçim kullanılır. Yalnızca yıldız takibine dayalı sistemler için bir tür kayıt mekanizması tipik olarak bir manyetik bant, bir gün boyunca yıldızın açısını temsil eden bir sinyalle önceden kaydedildi, başlangıçta kaset uygun zamana iletildi. Uçuş sırasında bant üzerindeki sinyal, yıldızın beklenen konumuna işaret edecek şekilde bir teleskobu kabaca konumlandırmak için kullanıldı. Teleskobun odak noktasında bir fotosel ve bir çeşit sinyal oluşturucu vardı. Tipik olarak bir kıyıcı olarak bilinen dönen bir disk, kıyıcı yıldızın fotosel üzerinde tekrar tekrar belirlenmesine ve kaybolmasına neden olarak daha sonra alternatif bir akım çıkışı üretmek için yumuşatılan bir sinyal oluşturuldu. Bu sinyalin fazı bir rehberlik sinyali üretmek için kasetteki ile karşılaştırıldı. Sistem onu bir INS ile birleştirerek daha da geliştirilebilir bir durumda INS üzerinde ek devre referans sinyalini oluşturarak ayrı bant ihtiyacını ortadan kaldırır. Bu yıldız atalet sistemleri özellikle 1900'lerden 1800'lere kadar yaygındı. Ancak bazı sistemler bugüne kadar kullanılıyordu. Şimdi mevcut teknoloji bölümünde ise şöyle bilgiler içeriyor. Şu anda birçok model kullanılıyormuş. Şimdi biz bu modellere birazdan daha ayrıntılı bakacağız. Yüksek hassasiyet gerektiren yıldız izleyiciler uzay aracından yansıyan güneş ışığı veya uzay aracı iticilerinden gelen egzoz gazı dumanları, yani güneş ışığı yansıması veya yıldız izleyici penceresinin kirlenmesi ile karıştırılabilir. Yıldız izleyiciler çeşitli optik hata kaynaklarının küresel sapma, renk sapmaları ve benzeri şeyler yanı sıra çeşitli hatalara da düşük uzaysal frekans, yüksek uzaysal frekans, zamansal vesaire bu tarz şeylere duyarlıdır diyor burada. Yıldız tanımlama algoritması içinde birçok potansiyel kafa karışıklığı kaynağı vardır. Şimdi gezegenler, yani uzay çok karmaşık bir yapıya sahip olduğu için bunun algoritması da zaman zaman karışıklıklara neden olabiliyor. Yani gezegenler, kuyruklu yıldızlar, süpernovalar, bunları karıştıran birkaç örnek. Bitişik yıldızlar için nokta yayılma işlevinin iki modlu karakteri. Şimdi diğer yakın uydular dünya üzerindeki büyük şehirlerden nokta kaynaklı ışık kirliliği. Bak, dünya üzerindeki ışık kirliliği de bunun algoritmasının karışıklığına neden olabiliyormuş. Yaygın olarak kullanılan yaklaşık 57 parlak deniz yıldızı vardır. Bununla birlikte daha karmaşık görevler için uzay aracı yönünü belirlemek için tüm yıldız alanı veri tabanları kullanılır. Yüksek doğrulukta tutum belirleme için tipik bir yıldız kataloğu, standart bir temel katalogdan, örneğin Birleşik Devletler Donanma Gözlem Evi'nden çıkarılır ve daha sonra örneğin görünür büyüklük değişkenliği, renk indeksi nedeniyle sorunlu yıldızları kaldırmak için filtrelenebilir belirsizlik veya güvenilmezliği ifade eden Hertzsprung-Russell diyagramındaki bir konum. Bu tür yıldız katalogları uzay aracında hafızada depolanan binlerce yıldıza sahip olabilir veya yer istasyonunda araçlar kullanılarak işlenebilir ve daha sonra yüklenebilir. Şimdi arkadaşlar bu tarz bir Wikipedia'dan tabi burada biraz sizinle birlikte bir araştırma yaptık. Yani yıldız izleyici nedir? Ne işe yarar? Nerelerde kullanılır? Az çok biraz kafamızda bir şeyler oluşmaya başladı. Şimdi bir de hani yıldız izleyici nedir? Hani biraz fotoğraflardan, görsellerden bir anlayalım, yani biraz araştırma yapalım. Ben daha önceden açmıştım. Şöyle şu şekilde görselleri mevcut. Şu görsellerden birkaç tanesini bir inceleyelim sizinle birlikte. Şu şekilde farklı farklı örnekleri mevcut. Biz de tabii şu şekilde bir şey yapmaya çalışacağız. Ama ya elimizden geldiği kadar maliyet konusunda biraz daha hani maliyetli bir şey ama güzel şekilde çalışabilecek bir şey üretmek istiyoruz. Yapmak istiyoruz sizi. Siz de videolarımızı izleseniz ve videoları beğenip yorum atmayı da unutmasanız çok sevinirim. Şimdi arkadaşlar bu tarz tabi profesyonelce üretimler de var. Şu şekilde yani mesela şu şekilde şurada bir aynen bir örnek parça. Amatörce yapılan şekilleri de var. Şu şekilde profesyonelce yapılan örnekleri de var. Bizim sizinle birlikte bunu yapacağız. Şu şekilde bir basit bir mekanizma üzerinde yapılanı da var. Şimdi arkadaşlar şekilde fotoğrafları mevcut. Bu da bir yer istasyonu yardımıyla yapılan bir Star Trek YouTube videosu çeken arkadaşlarımız da var Star Trek hakkında video çeken arkadaşların videolarını izleyip de biraz bilgi sahibi de olabiliriz. Bir ön çalışma sonuçta bu video. Ben birkaç tane videoyu izlemiştim daha önceden. Beğendiğim bir iki videoyu sizinle de paylaşmak istedim. Şu videolardan birkaç tanesini sizinle birlikte izleyip bir ön bilgi edinelim sizinle.
Linked up here or also in the description of the video. So again, today we're just going to be focusing on wide angle shooting. Now for today's demo, I am going to be using the Ioptron Skyguider Pro here. And as you can see, it's a very small, lightweight little tracker. I really enjoy using it. But if you haven't bought a star tracker yet, I already have a full-length guide. So you can see the main differences between the major trackers. I'll have a link to that up here and also in the video description. I recommend checking that out if you're still completely new to autoguiders, but for everybody else, you can continue following along. And you know, most of these trackers are going to operate virtually the same way. They're all going to have a piece up front that rotates. They're going to have more or less the same latitude base. So even if you don't have the Skyguider Pro, you can still follow along today and just apply the same concepts to your own tracker. The first thing I want to cover in this tutorial is how these star trackers actually work. And once you understand that, it should make things a lot more easy for you. And honestly, it's very simple. All we're doing with our star tracker is we're pointing it up to the north or the south celestial pole. This is where all the stars appear to rotate around. And if you've ever done a star trails photo, where you take multiple photos over the course of the night, you get that final image. And if you've ever pointed north or south, you've seen this effect where right there in the center, that's the center of the Earth's rotation. That's the north celestial pole in this case. That's where all the stars rotate around. And ultimately, our main goal with all of our star trackers is just to point it as closely as we can to that point. Once we're pointed up to the north or south pole like that, then once we turn on the tracker, it's actually going to move everything very slowly in that circular motion with the stars. And that's what's going to allow us to shoot 4 or 5 minutes, maybe even longer, with our lenses now and capture much higher quality images. Next, I want to show you just how well these star trackers work. And in these comparison images, what you're seeing is a standard 20-second long photo versus a 4-minute long photo taken with a star tracker. And as you can see, there's a massive difference in image quality because the more light you can capture, the less grain you'll have, the more detail you can pull out, and you can even pull out some of those beautiful faint colors in the nebula. And this is why I highly recommend getting a star tracker, just because it allows you to shoot longer shutter speeds and overall capture more light. And that's just going to help you out so much at night. It really will make a massive difference. Of course, there is one big downside to having a star tracker, and that is the fact that if it's slowly rotating your camera and following the stars will be sharp, but anything in your foreground will blur out. And that's going to cause you some problems. So that's something you have to always keep in mind when you're shooting with a star tracker, is that basically you need to focus on the stars in one image and then focus in the foreground in the other photo without the star tracker turned on. And then once you have both images, one where the stars are sharp but the foreground is blurred, and one where the foreground is sharp but the stars are blurred, then you can combine both photos and create a stunning final image.
Hepsi Burada'nın efsane Kasım indirimlerini kaçırma. Acele et, evinin havasını değiştirecek birbirinden şık ev tekstili ürünlerinde her gün özel efsane fiyatları yakala. Hepsi Burada uygulamasını indir, alışverişin efsanesi ol. Hepsi Burada. Arby's'de 16 saat fırınlanmış, özenle dilimlenmiş, enfes lezzeti ve uygun fiyatıyla hayranlık duyulan, ete doyuran 2 kişilik menü, şimdi 2 adet füme kaburga sandviçi, jumbo boy patatesi, onlu soğan halkası ve litrelik içeceğiyle kişi başı sadece 24.95'e. Üstelik Arby's, siz et severler için tıkla gelsin de. Etçiyiz biz Arby's.
Now, we're not going to have time to get into that post-processing workflow today, but if you want to check out my astrophotography post-processing course, there's probably at least 10 hours of tutorial videos in there strictly on post-processing astrophotography images. And I would say there's probably 5 or 6 videos dedicated to this blending technique. And it's actually very simple once you get the hang of it. So if you want to learn how to do that, check out my course. And next, we're going to talk about how to set up your star tracker properly to get those nice long exposures. And as we already discussed, all you really have to do is point this up to the north or south celestial pole where all the stars appear to rotate around. And it's actually very simple to do. First, you need to find north or south if you're in the southern hemisphere. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You can use an app on your phone and just hold it up and see which way north is. Personally, I like to find the Big Dipper. This is a constellation you can see anywhere in the northern hemisphere. Even if you're in the light polluted area, you'll be able to see it very clearly. And as soon as you find the Big Dipper, which will only take you a couple of seconds, then you can draw a straight line out from the corner star, and that will always lead you directly to the North Star. Once you found the North Star, you found north. So all I do is I just come back behind the tracker, I crouch down, I reposition the tripod until I see the North Star right over the top, and that's all there is to it. Now I'm facing north. Again, this is honestly all you have to do for a wide angle lens. You don't have to get much more precise than this. But there is one other piece to the puzzle, and that is the tracker needs to be angled up to the same spot in the sky where the North or South Pole is. And that's where your latitude or altitude adjustments are going to come in. Now that our star tracker is facing north, we need to dial in the latitude here on our base. So in order to find your current latitude, I recommend using the SAM console app. This is a free download. And once you have the SAM console app loaded up on your phone, we can click on the polar clock utility, then click on location, and it should very quickly tell you your current latitude and longitude. And then all we do is plug that number right in here on our base. In this case, I'm at about 41 degrees north, so I'm going to loosen my little lever here and then adjust until I'm as close as I can to 41. You don't have to be super precise here, and these bases aren't that precise to begin with, so as long as you're close, right around there, then I can lock it down, and that's all there is to it. Now my star tracker is facing north, and it's angled up to the right spot where the North or South Pole should be. One other thing I want to mention is that if you're above 40 degrees north or south, you'll have to flip everything around, and that's actually very simple. What I'm going to do is just rotate this kind of back to start, and then at this point I can quickly flip the entire SkyGuider Pro around like so, reattach it like that, and now I can just keep angling it backwards until I get where I need to be, whether that's 50 degrees north, 60 degrees north, etc. Now this is where the iOptron base doesn't perform nearly as well as the Skywatcher, because you are kind of limited here. And overall, I've had some troubles with the iOptron base. So if you do have troubles or if something breaks on here, I recommend going with the Skywatcher base instead. It's going to hold the SkyGuider Pro just fine, but that one can actually go up to 90 degrees, and it's overall just better design. So you might want to check that out. That's something I cover in the full buying guide if you haven't seen that already. But just to recap, we've pointed the star tracker north, we've dialed in the correct latitude, so now we're up at the correct angle. Now we can continue on with our setup process. Now that the star tracker is facing north and angled up to the correct altitude, we just need to double check the bubble level on the base and then verify that our tripod legs are nice and tight. So I'm just going to push down, make sure we're all good there. I even usually push the legs out to make sure they're extended fully. And then in this case, I'm going to take the tracker off just so I can see the bubble level easier right here. And it already looks pretty good, but if the bubble level's off, you can adjust your legs as needed. Once it's nice and flat, we can reattach our star tracker. And there we go. We're pretty much finished with our setup, to be honest. This is all I do if I'm shooting with my 14 to 24 millimeter lens, because since we're shooting so wide, you really don't have to be precise at all with this polar alignment. But what I'm going to show you next is how to use the polar scope build in here, just to clear that up, because I know that's kind of confusing. Once your polar scope is visible, or if you have the Sky Tracker Pro or the Star Adventure Mini, you'll need to attach your polar scope. Now we can do our precise polar alignment. And the first thing you're going to have to do with the SkyGuider Pro and the Star Adventure is get the reticle lined up. So just to show you here on the front, there's what's called the clutch here. You'll need to loosen this first and then rotate this red piece around while you're looking up through the polar scope, and you'll see it turn around kind of like a clock, and you need to get it like with 12 at the top, 6 at the bottom, just like a normal analog clock. And once you have it in that position, you can tighten down the clutch and then continue on with your precise polar alignment. In order to do a precise polar alignment with our built-in polar scope, we are going to have to use an app, and there's a lot of different options here. There's Polar Finder if you're on Android. I know there's quite a few options for iPhone, but I'd recommend everybody just get the Star Adventure Mini console to start off with. That's something we've already talked about, and it does a great job even if you've got a SkyGuider Pro or a Sky Tracker Pro. So once you load up the Star Adventure Mini console, we'll click on the polar clock utility. You should now see a reticle, and if you look very closely, there should be a dot on that reticle. That's going to line up with Polaris and the reticle inside of our polar scope. Again, if you have the iOptron SkyGuider Pro, the Sky Tracker here, it's okay that the two reticles don't quite line up. You just need to get it roughly in the same spot. Again, we're shooting at a wide angle, so this really isn't all that important anyway, but just to be thorough. So once you've found where Polaris needs to be in the reticle, again, think of it like a clock. If it's at 6:45 or 9 o'clock, whatever it is, now we need to adjust our base here to get the North Star visible in the same spot here in our polar scope. And to do that, we have two different screws. We have our azimuth adjustment screws and our altitude knob here on the back. And the way these work is we're going to turn the azimuth adjustment screws in the same direction at the same time. And if you look real close, you can probably see the star trackers very slightly turning to the left or the right. Then I can turn them in the opposite direction, and the star tracker will move the opposite way. That's how we're going to adjust things. Again, these are our azimuth adjustment screws, and we turn them both in the same direction at the same time. That's going to move the North Star left or right once it's visible inside the polar scope. There's also the altitude adjustment knob here on the other side, which you've already seen. That's how we adjusted the altitude. So all we're going to do now is turn that knob as well. And when I turn this, you'll see that the star tracker is actually moving up or down. And when you're looking through the polar scope and doing this, the North Star will appear to move up and down. So between those technically three screws, but your azimuth and your altitude knobs, we're going to position everything that way we can get the North Star as close as possible as we see in the app. And to be honest, this is where a lot of people have trouble, is that they either can't find the North Star when they look through the polar scope, or they see a bunch of stars. I'm not sure which is the correct one. So therefore, again, what I recommend doing is just crouching down behind your star tracker, looking over the top, and making sure you're actually looking at Polaris and is right over the center. And if that's all done correctly, I also double check the latitude is dialed in correctly, so I'm up at the right spot. Then from there, you should see the North Star somewhere in the frame. Once it is visible, we'll just adjust our azimuth and our altitude adjustment knob and get it as close as we can to the app. And at that point, we're pretty much done, so we can tighten down all of our screws. And you really want to make sure that these screws are all locked down tight, because if any of these are loose, your base will wobble and it's going to cause you some trouble later in the night. And then from here, we can attach our camera and continue on. But I want to reiterate here, this is not really necessary if you're going to be shooting at like 14 millimeters or even 35 millimeters. It's only necessary if you want to be very precise, or if you're shooting probably 50 millimeters and up. You do want to use the polar scope and use the app and do all that precise adjustments. But if you're just shooting very wide angle nightscapes, as long as this thing is pointed north and you've dotted in the latitude, it's really good enough. One other thing I want to mention before I forget, because I always get like a dozen questions on every video, I am using the Feisel CT344T tripod. This is a carbon fiber tripod, and as you can see, there's no center column, so my latitude base there attaches directly to the base of the tripod, and that gives me really stable results. It is a carbon fiber tripod though, so it's not as sturdy as it could be, but I really haven't had any issues with it. So that's the tripod I'm using. I recommend it, but there's definitely some cheaper options out there that might work a little bit better, or you might want to get a heavier duty tripod just to be more secure. Just to recap how these star trackers actually work, once the tracker is pointed up to the north or south celestial pole, where all the stars rotate around, and you turn on the tracker, it's going to move your entire camera very slowly in one direction or the other. And this is going to follow the same speed and motion of the stars. Therefore, you can shoot 4 or 5 minutes now, and the stars will still be sharp, but your foreground will blur out because, of course, your camera is constantly moving now. And it doesn't matter where your camera is facing. You can face it north, you can face it south, you can do whatever you want. It's still going to move in the correct direction. All that really matters is that your tracker is facing north or south, and the latitude has been dialed in correctly, and you're as close as possible to that point where the stars rotate around. Provided you've done that, you can do whatever you want with the camera, and you're still going to have great sharp stars even after 4 or 5 minutes with a wide angle lens. So all you have to do in the default configuration is install your ball head to this main screw. Once your ball head is nice and tight, you can attach your camera, and now you have free access to any portion of the night sky with this ball head attached. So pretty simple, right? It takes about 2 minutes to set up, and then from here we can move our camera wherever we want to. As I mentioned earlier though, since the foreground is going to blur out as long as the star tracker is turned on, you generally want to keep this mostly aimed at the sky, because anything in your foreground is going to blur out anyway. It's just going to make your life a lot more difficult later on. So when I'm doing my tracked images with my wide angle lens, it's usually angled up right where the Milky Way is at, and that's really all you have to do. There is one caveat here though, and pretty much all the star trackers operate the same way. If you're going to be using 3 or 4 pounds of camera gear total, that includes the ball head, you probably don't want to go with this mounting option because it's going to put a lot of strain on the tracker itself. And therefore, if you're going to be using a big, heavy lens like the Nikon 14-24 and a Nikon D750, you're probably going to want to install the declination bracket instead. That's more designed for heavier camera setups, and it's just going to put a lot less stress on the star tracker and should even give you some better results, but it is a little bit more of a pain to set up. So this is the way I recommend it. If you've got a small DSLR or a mirrorless camera, this is all you have to do and you're ready to shoot. But if you have a big setup like I do, you might want to install the declination bracket. So that's what we're going to look at next.
Hepsi Burada'nın efsane Kasım indirimlerini kaçırma. Acele et, minikleri özel, çok eğlenceli, çok rahat ve çok tarz binlerce moda ürününde her gün özel efsane fiyatları yakala. Hepsi Burada uygulamasını indir, alışverişin efsanesi ol.
Now, since I use a very large camera and lens, that's a Nikon D750 with the Nikon 14-24, that alone probably weighs 5 pounds. Then you factor in the ball head and all that. That's a pretty beefy setup. So I am going to need the declination bracket as well as a counterweight. And even if you have the Star Adventure, the Mini, or the Sky Tracker Pro, these are all going to work largely the same. But for the Sky Guider Pro anyway, it's very easy. We're just going to line up these grooves here on the back with the grooves here and then tighten it down. And you might be looking at my declination bracket right now and realizing it's not quite the way yours is set up if you just got your Sky Guider Pro. And that's something I cover in the full tutorial. You might want to check that out. I'll have that pop up in the corner again. It's not really that important, but I'd recommend at least checking it out. So the way this is going to work is we have a counterweight here. We can move this up or down, and our goal is to balance out our camera and lens. So I'm going to go grab my camera and I'll show you how this actually works. One other thing we got to talk about before I attach my camera is that there's a lot of different mounting options for the Sky Guider Pro. For the Star Adventure, it's much more straightforward, but if you do have the Sky Guider Pro, you'll want to grab this circular piece and install it to the circular piece up here. If you look real close, you notice there's a big screw here, not the little one that comes pre-installed, and you can just very easily unscrew it and then put on the big screw. That way I can just put this right into my ball head. Otherwise, I would need a threaded adapter, and that's just not going to be as sturdy as I would like. So once you've installed the big screw here that'll fit directly in the bottom of your ball head, we can attach this. I recommend doing this before you attach it all to there. Double check here on the back, it's nice and tight, and then just plop it on however you want. There we go. So now I can reach any position in the sky I want now that we have the ball head attached. And to continue on, I'm going to go grab my camera finally, and then we'll do our counterweight balancing. Once your camera is attached, make sure this ball head is nice and tight, because I've had a few close calls where this swings loose and it's almost always giving me a heart attack. That's why there's different ways you can mount this that are more secure, which I cover in the full Sky Guider Pro course. And you can even see now the weight of this lens is just moving the ball head down. And that's why you really need to have a sturdy ball head if you're going to be using a big lens, and got to make sure it's nice and tight, that way this thing doesn't droop at all. And as you can see, the star tracker is pointed north, but my camera's facing south, so I can reach any position in the sky I want. I can even face it north, east, south. It really doesn't matter because we have the ball head functionality. But what you'll want to do is position this, wherever you want to start photographing. Let's say the Milky Way is up around here. So once you get it kind of close, you can tighten everything down. Make sure everything really is locked in tight here before you do anything else. Now we need to balance the counterweight. So I'm going to loosen the clutch here and then just let it fall, but keep a firm hand on the camera and the lens. And our goal now is to move the counterweight in or out, so that way neither the camera side nor the counterweight side pulls pulls down. You can see my ball head just swung loose, which is what I was trying to warn you about. Almost gave me another heart attack there. So that's why this isn't the best way to mount things. It's just the easiest for me right now. And again, I cover that in the full Skyguider Pro course if you want to learn more, better ways to mount everything. Anyway, I'm going to move the counterweight out in this case. And in fact, there we go.
Evet arkadaşlar, yeni bir videoyla izlemiş
Sometimes you
olduk.
might need a second counterweight, believe it or not.
Biraz da farklı bir iki videoya bakalım
So now
istiyorum
the
sizinle
camera,
birlikte.
or the counterweight is pulling
Şöyle
downward.
bir tane şöyle bir video var.
And this is longer telephoto to taking perhaps the most mode. What I mean by that is I've
Bu da
attached the
kurulum
ball head
aşaması
adapter to
anlatıyor.
the RA axis of the mount, and now I can actually move it around wherever I want to point it. Wide angle shots of the night sky using a wide angle lens like this on a DSLR. When you need to put more weight on the mount, you can actually attach.
Montaj aşamasında ama şöyle bir
The wedge base on the mount.
göstermek
Now
istiyorum.
I've used a number of star trackers before, and the Ioptron Skyguider Pro was probably my favorite mount going into.
Tam böyle istediğim şekilde anlatılmamış da. Şurada da şey
You are a Milky Way photographer and you do it.
görselleri
It's like star
paylaşmış
tracking.
galiba.
Expose the
Şöyle
highlight,
ileri alıp
practicing that. Something that a lot of people are doing, but not a lot of information is everything that he did in Central Idaho, 30 plus in.
şurası. Şu.
Sonunda bitti.
Bu da bir arkadaşın paylaştığı bir video.
Bunları 3 boyutlu yayıcıyla çıkarabilirsiniz. Size linkini aşağıya paylaşacağım. Şu an idare olarak gördüğünüz eski bir kundak parçası. Bu da bir tripod. Bunları dışında sabit bir demir boru parçası bulup açılı bir şekilde şu tarafa şu gördüğünüz hizaladığım bu alana bir lazer yerleştirebilirsiniz. Ya da bir kılıcı dürbün yerleştirebilirsiniz. Daha sonrasında buraya herkesin bildiği gibi fotoğraf makinesini yerleştireceksiniz. Ve kutup ayarını da yaptıktan sonra, burada tam yolu ayarladıktan sonra fotoğraf makinesinde bıraktığınızda buradaki dişli çarklar dönmeye başlayacak. Neticesinde belli bir dönüş hızında, RPM hızında takibine başlayacak. Şimdi klasik 12 voltluk akümüz bulunmakta. Bu aküyü şöyle timsah kıskaçlarla birleştirdim. Step motora kabloları kurmak için özellikle şuradan çıkıyor kablolar. Daha tam bitmedi. Bu şekilde küçük parça parça bantlarla kurdum. Böyle bir LCD ekran yaptım. Burada koruyucu var. Burası motorların giden güç kırmızıya geldiğinde yanıyor. Burada da yön ve durdurma ile alakalı. Anlık durdurma istersen buraya yapabilirsin. Bütün gücü kesebilirsin. Şimdi böyle deneyelim. Şimdi sistemimizi çalıştırdık. Şimdi bütün hepsi çalışmadan önce ne yapalım, ne diyorsun anlatalım. Bir tane butona bastığında duruyor. Ayar yapmayı unutmuyoruz. Ayarı çok önemli. Ayarını yapmadan takip işine başlamıyoruz. Şimdi gördüğünüz üzere duruyor diyor. Çünkü iki tane butona bastım. Şimdi butonlarımızın ikisinin üstünden aldığımızda dönüşümüz başladı. Küçük olan 4 RPM, büyük olan ise 1'e 4'ten 1 RPM hızında dönüyor. Peki bu adam yükseldi. Bunu nasıl geri saracağız? Buradaki butonlardan hız ayarı yaptım ve hız ayarıyla hemen gittiği kadar geri gelebiliyor. Ne yazık ki bu yayı koyma sebebim de buradan bastırıp yukarı çıkıyordu. Ben de yayla onu sabitledim. Daha iyi mekanik sistemler tasarlayabilenler varsa bana da yardımcı olursa çok sevinirim. Ben kodu, ondan sonra elektronik devreyi, dizaynı hepsini paylaşacağım. Şimdi şurada durduralım. Evet, durduğunu biliyoruz. İsteyen varsa buradan gücü de kesebilir. Şimdi bu klasik bir Arduino Nano. Burada görmüş olduğunuz A4988 devre kartı. Burası 12 voltluk aküden gelen güç kaynağı. Bu zaten sistemi kesiyor. Şurada gördüğünüz ikili portlar step motordan gelen 4 tane kablo. Gördüğünüz üzere burada bir led ışıkla da durum bildiriyor.